Welcome to the Peer Lab. I am Nina Eitzheim, the director and founder of the Peer Lab, the practice-based experimental epistemology lab. And we're just starting our second year, and we're so excited about finally being in the process of moving into our physical space after a year of working virtually. And we can't wait to soon invite you to take part in participatory events in the space itself, for those of you who can. We'll also continue to have virtual programming, so we'll be able to connect and work with all of you. And this year we have three main projects. In the first project, we're mapping dominant language used to describe conceptual music and conceptualize music and actually that we use in our music practice. And we do this in an effort to decolonize and abolish harmful and discriminatory effects such as language can have on music and the people who create and listen to it. In the second project, we're working in collaboration with Professor Michelle Caswell from the Department of Information Studies here at UCLA and artist Nobuko Miyamoto from Great Leap, a Los Angeles-based performing arts organization, in a collaborative process by which they can create their own archival collections. So we're really interested in who gets to have archives, where they are, who controls them, who gets to use them, who gets to tell stories. And finally, in the third project, we investigate what I think about as relational creative practice, taking place in dimensions of color, light, sound, and space through the work of composer, trumpeter, and thinker Wadada Leo Smith. And before we get started with today's event, I want to express a huge thank you to the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music for making this event possible with us. Especially to Jose Carrillo, who is here and helping with everything technical. And a very warm thank you to Juliette Belloc, who has created all our graphics and is an integral thinker and collaborator in the lab. And last but not least, Charlie Stipe, who is sitting here with me as well and has worked really closely with myself and Alba to create the event that we'll have today. So it's a really special honor to introduce the Peer Lab's first pop-up lab guest, Alba Triana. Thank you, Alba, for being here. I think you're muted, Alba.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, hello, I'm very happy to be here and congratulations on your project.
Oh, here, okay, good.
Yes, I think you can hear me now, right?
Yeah, you're good. So Alba is a composer and sound installation artist. She was born and raised in Bogotá, Colombia. She lives in Miami, but as we'll talk about today, she has a studio practice between Miami and Bogotá. Her work has received numerous honors and support, including fellowship from the Civiatella Foundation, the South Arts State, as well as commissions and grants from around the world, ranging from the Kronos Quartet, the American Composers Forum, GIMEB from Bourges, France, and the Ministry of Culture of Colombia, and many, many others. And we'll just give you her bio so you can read about all those accolades and engagements that she has had. It's a really special event for me, this event that we're having today, because Alba was one of the first people I met when I moved to the United States more than 20 years ago. At that time, we were both students at CalArts, or the California Institute of the Arts. And over the years, we became just closer and closer friends, and we have collaborated on a piece called Body Music. And I dedicate a whole chapter to that piece and our collaboration in my book, Sensing Sound. And I've also, on a more personal note, had the great pleasure of being her guest in Bogotá many, many times. There's no better host than Alba. So she's a dear collaborator, dear colleague, and dear, dear friend. So all those years ago, when we first started talking, I think it was Alba's description of a dinner composition where the performance was structured as a table setting with appetizer and entree and dessert that got me both very interested in her work and inspired by her approach to music and art. So when I was thinking about inaugurating the kind of event that we here in the Peer Lab call a pop-up lab, like a pop-up restaurant that transplants their work into a new space for a short period of time, I couldn't think of a more perfect person than Alba to kick off our pop-up lab events. So today we have invited ourselves into the studio, into her studio, and all of you too. And because of global pandemic restrictions and also because of the exact phase Alba's work is in today, which we'll talk about soon, the Peer Lab team and Alba and her team have worked really hard to prepare a virtual studio visit for you today. And Alba, your exhibition, Vibrational States, just opened a month ago at the Museum of Modern Art in Bogotá. So that's very, very exciting. And we'll put a link to that so you can check that out as well. So therefore, as it happens, the pieces you have been working on for such a long time, 1.5 years plus, is no longer in your studio. There are other stuff there, but not those pieces. So we have assembled together with Alba, or really Alba has assembled a multimedia capture of the creative development process that took place in the studio for like the last 1.5 years. And I want to thank you and your team for showing us and making available to us today your raw footage, working images, plans, and videos from the long developmental process of your latest exhibit. As you may know, the core of the Peer Lab philosophy is to investigate and to think through practice. We think by doing things. We think by doing things. We believe that all investigation and thinking is informed and limited through its practice, even when the practice is not obvious. Like it just seems like what we do when we make music. For example, within the Western music system that dominates concert hall programming, funding, and music education, the practice of listening through the tempered scale, music notation, and all proscenium relation to the music gives shape to the music that is created and makes sense to its performers and audiences. Alba herself started her training within classical music as a young child and followed its default practices. She wrote music on staff paper for the instruments that you'll find in the orchestra. And I'm going to start another screen share now. So let me set it up. So this is an image of the dinner piece that we mentioned a little while ago. It's another image of that. And then here's the image I also wanted to get to, which is just an example of one of Alba's more traditional scores, like in the practice that she was trained in. So the practices and tools that she was expected to engage in, vis-a-vis her training, I think of them as both creating affordances and limitations of her music, and every composer who writes and practices with that kind of tool set. So Alba started experimenting with different forms really early on. However, as you know, the dinner piece is an example of that. But observing Alba from the outside, as I did as a friend and as a colleague, and having conversation with her as she developed her work in the early 2000s, to my mind, your work, Alba, even at that time, was still kind of tethered to what I think about as the limitations that are set forth by so-called Western music composer practices. But as we'll discuss today, Alba's work progressed from representing time through notation beyond these Western conventions into space, light, and vibration. And those are really your compositional parameters now today, I think. Mm-hmm. And there are many ways to explain this shift, of course, but we'll do it through a string piece, a solo cello piece. And we'll see the score here. So you can see it's still tethered to staff notation, but it's proportional. It doesn't have bars, etc. So you can see kind of extension. And in this piece, Alba explored and expanded the sonority of the cello by considering the material possibilities of the string, the wood, and the envelope of the resonance. So let's hear a little bit of that here. Continuing her exploration of the materiality and the physics of the string, Alba moved to mounting the string completely independent of the cello. While development of work, of course, is not completely linear and not neat, I see this as a very important moment in the shift of Alba's practice from moving from the traditional tool of the composer, staff-based notation and pitch-based instruments, to material to which she could fasten and energize the string. She had to go out and find pieces of wood and the materials that she used to build her sculptures. She exchanged the body of the cello with planks and the pen for power tools. So Alba, can you tell us a bit about the process of moving from a piece where the string is still attached to the cello to where you mount the string outside of the cello, to finally expanding the instrument into the entire space and to explicitly move outside the sensorium of audition, to add very explicitly to work with a wider range of our sensorium? What changes did you have to make to your tools and practices, and how did these changes affect your imagination and your subsequent work?
Well, indeed, as you just had said, I started my career composing mostly symphonic and electronic music, even though I always felt the need to work holistically in a cross-disciplinary fashion. And I did some collaborations here and there, but I mostly continued to compose music in the system that I was trained into. And then at some point, I faced a personal event that prevented me from writing music. I couldn't produce work the way I understood it. And I had a lot of time to reflect upon my practice and other things. But the situation provided me with an essential resource for an artist: time. Having time allowed me to realize that I had deep questions which I couldn't even articulate at the beginning, and I had the time to linger on them. So I decided to hire an assistant and to start running experiments in a very intuitive, very playful way, without any professional expectations. And that since I believed I wasn't working, I allowed myself to go as far as I wanted, apparently outside of my compositional practice. So the situation provided me with another essential resource: freedom. I could spend time doing what I wanted without the pressures of following a professional agenda, and that was quite important. So in a very organic way, I gradually realized that this experimentation was a creative process and that a new body of work had emerged. So while doing these experiments, I landed into a material that I found fascinating, and it makes reference to a string instrument. So there is a string, you're seeing that is just one string, and the string is attached at both ends. There is a loudspeaker, and the loudspeaker excites the string, and sound travels through the string and becomes visible. So with a speaker, a string, an amplifier, and a computer, these were the tools that I used to create an instrument that produces visible sound instead of audible sound. So it was a different material because it was not audible, but I decided to challenge myself to use my compositional skills to create a 5.5-minute composition that could be observed but not heard. It's a composition that takes form of a sculpture, as you're seeing, but that also unfolds in time. And here I had to deal with new parameters to present the object, like physical scale, lighting, how to arrange the circulation around it. But I definitely engaged my compositional background when manipulating the wave's properties to create the narrative that unfolds in time. So in the next work, since I had been dealing with a visual material, I decided to incorporate light as a structural parameter in the composition. So in the image that you're seeing, I continue to use the same instrument. It is again presented as a sculpture at the center of the space. And the sculpture presents a visible sound wave interacting with a light beam. Behind the sculpture, there is a bidimensional plane that you can see where the light beam and the shadow of the string gets reflected. The space, I wanted the space to acquire depth, and I also wanted to do a reference to bidimensional art like photographs or painting. So here the space becomes an even more important parameter and also a tool, because I need space in order to work. So in the video that you're seeing, you see how the visible sound wave, which is traveling through the string, interacts with a light beam. Right now, you're seeing that there is just it looks green because the beam contains just one color frequency. But now the beam contains a lot of frequencies. So the string decomposes the light beam into its individual frequencies, which are saying as different colors. And this means that my new materials are visible sound and light waves interacting. And this is something that usually escapes our senses. So I require the tools and equipment for the system to work, but my most important compositional material here are sound, visible sound and light waves. And I'm manipulating again these wave properties over time using a computer code that was developed as I created the piece. So in the next work, I decided to move from having one instrument, as in the previous pieces, to an ensemble. So there are 5 sculptures, which can be understood as sculptures or instruments that play the same composition at different frequency rates. Maybe we can move to the next video. Exactly. So we see that the 5 sculptures or the different sculptures are playing the same composition at different frequency rates. Again, this is visible sound on the string, and here the visible sound is more stationary. It is not changing. And I'm manipulating the wave properties. I'm treating the light waves as I have treated sound waves in the past. This is a discourse that lasts for about 23 minutes. And here the interaction between the visible sound and the light is a little bit different, but it's a narrative that unfolds in time. And here the sculptures occupy the space, not as independent pieces distributed in an exhibition room, as one usually encounters in a museum, but as members of an ensemble that cooperate to constitute a piece that unfolds in time. So this is the process of me fully embracing the space-time dimension in my work, and to continue to compose using vibration that is not audible. Yes, so this is basically this process.
Thank you so much, Alba. This is really fascinating. And as we've mentioned at the top of the hour, your studio is quite empty now, as your exhibition or continuous concert, one might think of it as, was mounted a month ago at the Museum of Modern Art in Bogotá. And here we can see the poster that will meet you when you approach the museum to the left. And we're going to, you have 3 pieces up. We're going to focus on one, but we'll just see a few images of all the pieces that are there right now. If you are in Bogotá, please go and see it if you haven't, and hear it if you haven't. So here's the second piece. And here's the piece that we're going to be discussing in more depth today. So in the book I mentioned already, Sensing Sound, where I dedicated a chapter to our collaboration, Alba's and my collaboration, Body Music, I define music as an intermaterial vibrational practice. I think that music is really dealing with vibrations and it's a practice of vibration. And I always return to that hypothetical question of whether if a tree falls in the forest, whether it makes a sound if somebody's there to hear it or not. And to me, that question encapsulates Western music's reduction of music. A rich intermaterial vibrational event like a sound or music rather, or a falling tree is being reduced to sound and the sensorium of addition only. And I think that's a poverty in our understanding of music. And it's been so fascinating, Alba, to follow how you've continued this line of working directly with material vibrations rather than with one reduction only sound, like you've been working with all of them. And it's been so instructive to see that to develop such work, you've had to continue to add dimensions to your compositional practice and add tools, from the vibrating string or the musical instruments to light, and now really to space. So can you talk to us about how vibration factors into your current exhibition as a whole, as well as in your experimentation process?
Yes. While working on the music on a bound string series, which was the pieces that I already showed you, I understood that I had been using my creative practice to observe nature at a very fundamental level, that I wanted to explore what is true for everything. And vibration is at the core of this idea. So everything in the physical world can be reduced to a vibrational state. Everything is internally active. Where you are, where all of us are here, everything is vibrating, but we cannot perceive it. So in the subsequent pieces, I continue to work with other forms of vibration and energy, like electromagnetism, and the other two pieces that you saw from the museum deal with electromagnetism. And one thing that is important is that at some point I stopped being too concerned about what is the sensory channel through which the material is manifested. So I just accept whatever perceptual manifestation the material has. So throughout this process, I stopped seeing relevant distinction between these different forms of vibration and, in a way, among the different senses. So right now we're seeing one of the first experiments that I ran for the piece that we are discussing. This is the main piece at the Mambo, the Museum of Modern Art of Bogotá show. And this is part of the series of works that is called Resonant Bodies, which explores this notion that at a deep micro level, everything is internally active. And this, as I said before, this is one of the first experiments. So in this piece, I stimulate an object, a symbol, and this is like a metaphor of all objects, and I'm exciting it with energy. So when the symbol receives this very carefully controlled energy, it naturally vibrates, and we get to hear its natural vibrations. So it is not about imposing something to the instrument, like imposing some rhythms, but it is more about revealing that internal activity, those internal vibrations that reside inside the symbol and that we usually cannot perceive. So in previous works of this series, I worked with the intrinsic vibrations of some instrument. In fact, there is a previous symbol piece that you can find in my website or my YouTube channel. But here in Harmonic Motion, there's something that is important, is that I wanted those vibrations to be visible. So here I'm running experiments to make these vibrations visible. And I was able to develop a system that allowed me to see the instrument's vibrational activity floating around the space. So everything happens in the physical world. Here we are not seeing any digital simulations. I wanted everything to be analog. The waves are not projected. They are actual, the symbol vibrations seeing in the physical world.
Thank you so much, Alba. So here at UCLA, this is our second week of the new academic year. And last week, as we were very deep in this process of preparing, I was walking around the building and people were preparing here too to get ready. And I saw a composer colleague's door open, and I thought, oh, she's there. I want to go and say hi. But it happened to be the piano tuner, of course, getting ready her tools for the start of her year. But this shift in your work, Alba, requires so much more than a freshly tuned piano. And I know that you first, we saw those first videos with those first little experiments on the table. And I believe that was maybe in your studio, like smaller studio in Miami, more like a kind of home studio, like something you just expanded from what you had already. But then as we're seeing your work expanding, needing a lot of space, because actually the space itself is a compositional parameter, you had to expand. So you added a couple of studios in Bogotá, and then you're living kind of between Bogotá and Miami. And we also talked about how even our phones and something like FaceTime or small video snippets that we can send each other all the time over, let's say, WhatsApp, is kind of part of the studio itself too. It's like the tissue that connects to different locations. And that has allowed you, these tools together have allowed you to develop the three pieces that are, during this physical distancing of the pandemic, the three pieces that are up at the museum now. So the videos that you're seeing now are really more than documentary material. They're kind of the studio in itself, I think of them as. And in a way, they were kind of like final sketches for your final work as well. So this is like a studio visit. Seeing these videos, it was the studio for Alba as well. Those videos were very much segments of your studio, I believe. So getting back to harmonic motion, I know that the catalyst for harmonic motion, and I think really all your works kind of start around the question for you, a question that you maybe isn't even completely articulated, but harmonic motion started as a question around time and space, and exploring and trying to answer that question and staying with that question required you to explore a lot of technical solutions and restagings between the studio spaces and then finally to the museum space itself. So can you share how these challenges, alterations, and expansions of your toolkit played into the overall conception of the pieces that are exhibited right now?
Absolutely. When I found this material that you're seeing right now, these floating waves, I realized that this material could really transform the space. And I felt that the work required to be immersive. Visitors should be able to walk inside the piece, immerse in the audible and visible vibrational activity generated by the symbol, which is at the center of the space, is where everything emerges from the symbol. So based on the museum space, I designed a preliminary spatial composition. So there is a composition in time. This piece loops every 8 minutes, but there is also a spatial composition, and the one that you're seeing in the diagram. And I'm using here another very recurrent natural structure, is a spiral model. So the wave reflections are floating around the symbol, progressing in size as they are further away from the symbol. What you see at the center is the symbol, and those black lines are the reflections in the space. And the one that says the number 1.1 is about 12 by 12 feet, which in the metric system is about 4 by 4 meters. So it's a huge reflection. And the ones that are close to the symbol are smaller, so it progresses in size, and people walk around the space. This is a big room. So once I had this plan, my next step was to find a room with similar proportions to the museum space to set up a prototype of the installation. So again, as Nina has mentioned before, space is a parameter because I'm solving a spatial problem, but it's also a tool. I needed to find a studio, a big studio. So here we started, sorry, I'm moved here. Okay, so we're starting setting up a prototype of the piece in the studio, and most importantly, transforming the space and feeling how the space works. And then all of this time we had been working remotely. I was in Miami and my assistants were in Bogotá working. And here I came to Bogotá, and we had to work a lot in refining the system, in testing different surfaces. That was a lot of work to reflect the waves on, identify their sizes, the exact fabrics, the mounting system, the exact distribution of the fabrics, and the laser system, because I'm using lasers to visualize the vibrations around the space. And I finally got a definite installation plan, which is the one that you see in the image. And then the last stage, this is again in the studio, was dedicated to fine tune and making the system stable, which was very hard because the system tends to be quite fragile. Everything happens in the physical world. So whatever happens with the atmosphere, temperature, humidity affects the system. If things move slightly, let's say if a laser moves 1/8 of an inch, things get, I lose the calibration. So it's very sensitive because it's not a simulation. So in the next video here, we can see this was the final prototype at the studio. This is a video that we recorded for us. And I don't know if you are able to see our bodies, but that gives you reference of the scale of the reflections in the space. As I said before, the biggest reflections that you're seeing in the back are about 12 by 12 feet. And the ones that are close to the symbol are about 6 inches or 15 centimeters.
Thank you. I've seen this video so many times now, and it's equally fascinating each time. So I'm sad I'm not in Bogotá right now, but maybe I will make it happen. So since you're composing with space, not only as a vehicle, like to put things inside, but really as a tool or a sort of instrument, can you talk about the rearranging of the composition when you mount the piece into a new space, such as a museum? It's like kind of like, I was imagining it's a little bit like arranging a composition from like a brass band to a violin, to a quartet, string quartet or something like that. Is really quite a big shift. You're not just putting objects into another container. The container itself is your instrument.
Yes, I would add that we had to do that in a week.
At very high altitude.
Exactly, 2,600 meters above sea level. So this is the museum room, and the museum space is bigger than the space that we had at the studio. So as Nina is mentioning, we had to readjust the spatial composition to the new proportions. We had technical challenges and things that, for example, took us by surprise. Maybe you can move to the next slide. For example, when we were at the studio, the lasers were moving every morning. We couldn't understand why. We got to the studio and everything was moved. And then realized that because of the heat in the morning, it has been cold during the night, things move, and things move a lot. So when we got to the museum, we had to figure out how the symbol was going to interact with the atmospheric conditions of the space. And that we had to adjust everything to the new proportions. In the video that is running right now, you see what was the final distribution of the elements in the space. Yes, we had to figure out how to recalibrate the whole system.
Let's just watch this a little bit. So this is a detail of one of these reflections. And as you, I think, even though through this documentation, we're not there, you can sense that this is a truly immersive piece. And it's quite different to document it and to share it outside of the space itself, outside of the concert itself, than to do an audio recording of one of your, like, let's say, the cello piece that we heard. So can you talk a bit about the documentation of the piece itself? It's very different than just putting up very good microphones and even different, like, I know you have very good cameras too, and that's still been a big challenge.
Yes, this is such an experimental project. I've never done a work like this, nor have I seen one. So the whole process of creating the piece has been about discovering and following the work's needs. And this also applies for the documentation. Once we set up the installation at the museum some weeks ago, we started trying to document it. And we knew that this is not like documenting a concert or a regular visual arts show, but we didn't imagine that it was going to be that hard, because we're capturing waves floating in the space in a pitch black environment. So the takes that I'm gonna show you today are still exploratory. We are still understanding how to get a good capture of the final video. So you can get a general idea, but I hope if you can come to Bogotá and see the show. So this is a panoramic view of the installation. And as I said before, this general view is probably one of the most difficult to capture. The symbol is on the right. It's not I don't know if you can see it. And the reflections are way bigger than they are seen in the camera. But you get to see something about the general distribution of the elements in the space. And also, this is an 8-minute composition, so the symbol goes through different levels of excitation. For example, how it was sounding at the beginning. And in the next take, the camera is moving a little bit, so it just shows how people can circulate in the space inside the reflections. Again, as I said before, things for some reason are seen smaller right now in the video, but this is just to get you an idea of, usually the public walks around the room, because also things are heard differently and seen differently depending on where things are in the space. And finally, I wanted to give you a close-up of the symbol, because I think this is very interesting that when I excite the symbol with energy, one gets to see the actual waves traveling through the symbol, and the symbol physically moves. It looks as if it was flexible, and we see the notes and the antinodes of the waves in the symbol and how the waves interacting along the symbol's rim. And this is something that happens completely independent from the laser system. This is basically how the symbol vibrates. And in this last video, we see how the light in the room, if you look at the rim, how the waves are also seen just because there is a little light on the contour of the symbol. And this happens again naturally, independent from this laser system that we installed, but we get to see the same waves that we're seeing, the same waveforms that we're seeing on the floating reflections. And I wanted to end with this image because I find this fascinating.
Thank you so much, Alba. There's so many other details that you could tell us about in terms of these compositions. We were focusing on the practice very much in this initial part of the conversation, but I would imagine that people are curious about maybe some more of the technical solutions and the laser system, etc. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put the question in the chat and we can call on you. So I think for us, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to take a moment to stop the screen share here. And here we go. And maybe can you highlight for us? So Faraz can ask his question and just with your voice, or if you would like me to read it, just tell me in the chat for us, but we can also highlight you. And if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand.
Yeah, so first of all, beautiful work. I'm just blown away by this. I've always just, I mean, the other day I was just playing around with a broken piano string and seeing these circular kinds of vibrations, and I actually recorded it. I was just wondering, as an undergraduate, I had to study physics and things like that. Do you think about some of these matters through the mathematics of physics, thinking how to generate some of these shapes? And because I was thinking of the calibrations that you had to do with the lasers. I could think, as you mentioned, with the atmosphere, I don't know if you could calculate things like that, or is it more intuitive?
You know, it's both. I have to work with the physical aspect. In fact, when I do this type of compositions, I carefully control in time the energy that I'm sending to the objects, and I'm manipulating the properties of the waves over time. And I keep a score that looks very different from a traditional score, but deep inside is very similar. I find it very useful to keep some things of a traditional score. So those things, which are things that are completely related to physics, I have to calculate how the beatings are going to be, to control the frequencies, amplitude, phase, all the parameters. I do it because I have a knowledge on that, but I also engage a lot my intuition because I'm an artist, and I really follow my intuition. And as I said before, for me, creating artwork is very much about developing a sensitivity to understand what the work needs. So I try not to get in the way of the work too much when I'm developing a piece. And I have to say something else. You're saying that the changes of the atmospheric conditions, I wish we were at the point in which we could calculate that, because that really makes us suffer. But so far, we just are realizing, you know, we didn't know that that was going to happen. So we take care of the things as we discover what happens.
And
interesting.
That, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, because I was thinking also, going back to Nina's question, if a tree fell in a forest, well, what if something fell on another planet with a different atmosphere? What would it sound like? Or I don't know if you would think maybe in the future of doing some of these things in closed environments, like with different gases or things like that. Just throwing that out there because there might be interesting visualizations happening in different ways. Just sort of thinking aloud. No,
absolutely. And, you know, I have so many ideas and little time to develop them, but I think that's very interesting. And the other thing is that we usually refer to sound as something that we are going to hear, but sound can travel through different media. We can see it, as we saw it in some of the pieces, in these pieces. We can feel it. It can travel through our skeleton. Sound can be perceived through different senses. And that's, so things change also depending on where the surrounding conditions. Yes.
And I think, that's where our work meet in terms of the Peer Lab and you, because we can have all the calculations in the world, but then there's something, we don't know what the exact condition is going to be. So that's when we observe, that's when we do, that's when we adjust physically or within the practice itself.
Yeah,
So,
there's something, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was going to add that, for example, in the harmonic motion piece, what we see and what we hear is the same. It's a symbol vibrating, but we're seeing and hearing its vibrations. So for example, when I compose a piece like that, I compose the work listening and looking at the vibrations. So I engaged my two senses or whatever I need to engage in order to do the composition, what is gonna be the final result.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Please raise your hand or just speak up or put it in the chat. I am curious about the laser system. Can you talk about how the vibrations are visualized? You were saying it's exactly the same sound and the reflections that we're seeing. Can you talk about that connection?
Yes. So this is a system that is close to interferometry. I don't know if you have heard of interferometry. You can look it up after the session. For example, the LICO interferometry is a technique that is used in physics to observe vibration. And for example, right now they are measuring in the LICO, I think that's a huge interferometer, how they are measuring the gravitational waves. So I've been supported by the Swiss government since 2018 to do research, and I was able to travel and to work with scientists from CERN in Switzerland and from EPFL, which is the School of Polytechnical in Lausanne. And I had the opportunity to work with scientists and to understand how this system works. So I'm using an adaptation because I don't have access in a museum to an interferometer. But what we did at the studio was to develop a technique that is derived from the interferometry.
Thank you so much. I see. I just asked you, Marina, do you want to ask your question by voice or?
Yeah, sorry, I was just slow and all of these getting everything turned on.
Oh, totally. No, I wasn't sure if you've even seen it because I just
yeah,
and
no,
thank
it's
you
just
everybody for being here.
Work. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to learn about it more. And but I think I was curious about whether, I mean, we see it as red. I think you said that maybe the video is different than what's necessarily experienced, but I'm not sure if that extends to the color of the laser. But also, I guess I was wondering if color is an aspect of vibration that you've experimented with, and in terms of having different wavelengths or having different possibilities.
Yes, I've worked with different light frequencies, which is perceived as colored, and especially in previous pieces. Here in this piece, we have the red color because that is a, when one sees a color is because that is the frequency at which the wave is vibrating. And red is a frequency, many of us have red lasers. So they are that frequency in a laser, the beam is very concentrated. But we can use it without being a dangerous laser. If we had a more powerful, at a different frequency, a more powerful laser, maybe it could be damaging for our eyes, or people can even cut or do surgeries with different types of lasers. So the color is related to the fact that a color that works for us safely in a regular environment.
Thank you so much, Marina and Alba. And it's wonderful. We see people here from all of the Americas and from Europe. I saw Copenhagen. I saw lots of amazing artists and thinkers here in this space. Miles, I saw you had the question. Do you want to go on camera or or do you want me to read it out loud for you?
Sure, I can go on camera.
All right.
Hi, I was just curious about your methods for exciting the symbol, and if you had to go through multiple iterations of designs to optimize that energy transfer. Because I imagine, like, if you're exciting the pole that holds the symbol, like there might be some loss between the mechanism that connects the two together.
So I'm having a little difficulty understanding what you're saying. Nina, can you translate a little bit? Because I'm assuming that you cannot take your mask off, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Maybe Nina can tell me a little.
I think, Miles, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're mainly curious about the mechanism, and I'm reading here, you know, used to excite the symbol. Like, how are you exciting the symbol? And how many, maybe you can talk a bit about the iterations you had to go through to get to the max, to the energy transfer that you wanted to use.
Yeah, so it's complex to explain the whole system and how it works, but basically I'm using acoustic energy to excite the symbol, and I just send and control the voltage and the frequency that the symbol receives throughout the 8 minutes. But I think explaining the whole system can be, you know, a little complicated right now.
But are you like putting wires to the symbol, like to the stand of the symbol, or like first, like what kind? Can you say a little bit more?
A little bit of the chef's recipe.
All right, she doesn't want to tell. That's it. Got it. Okay. All right. Are there more questions? I see Charles, you're saying hi from Cleveland. Hi, Charles. All right.
I have a question.
All right.
I really enjoyed, I mean, I'm sorry I arrived late.
Oh, Sandro. Hey.
Yes.
So happy to see you, Sandro.
It's wonderful to see you, and especially your work is so beautiful, so amazing. And again, I missed the first part, so I apologize. But I arrived when you were explaining the waves, the sound project. So I actually, I mean, I will have millions of technical questions, and some of them other people have asked, so thank you. But when you described that beautiful piece where there is almost an orchestra, the idea is to have multiple waves, right? Mm-hmm. Are they responding to each other, or they are individually acting, and then the interaction is spontaneous? I don't know if it makes sense what I'm asking, but I wonder if there's some kind of planning.
No, I perfectly understand your question. As you're saying, the different, I'm calling them sculptures, but they could be both instruments or any other name. What I did is that I really spent time understanding the interactions among them. So they don't interact spontaneously. So for example, I made sure that every 50 seconds, all the strings synchronize. Every 100 seconds, a group of strings get synchronized. Every, you know, so I have these periods of time in which the waves are behaving that I know when the wave is gonna go up and down. And at some point, all of them do something together. 3 of them do something together. 2 of them do something together. But that is based on the calculations that I had made about the waves and when all of them could be together. So, and they actually act as an ensemble. So I made the composition. So each sculpture is playing the same piece at a different frequency rate, but they are calculated so they synchronized quite every whatever amount of time. I don't know if I explained clearly.
Yes,
Okay.
it's amazing. And I hope I don't diminish your work if I say something about my work, but it reminded me, I was working as an animator. I do animation on waves, animating waves. And even though I was following a kind of a similar process, although yours sounds like way more precise and intense, mine was intuitive. And again, I was basically having the waves somehow matching at some point and then diverge and continue moving. But I found, again, your work, like it's a wonderful combination of, in a way, multisensorial science. And it's also beautiful. I wish I could be in the space to experience it, because I'm sure it's like another layer. So thank you.
Thank you. And the exhibition at the museum is gonna be till February 6th. So if someone is coming to Bogotá, just I'll be happy to meet you there.
And I'm sure this piece will travel, although it will give you a little headache each time you have to reinstall it or rearrange it, as we would say in music. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. It's just wonderful to share this space with you, and especially to gather around Alba's practice and her work. We're in this big transition at the Peer Lab now, trying to do some more things in person. So we're just, if you're interested in what we do, we'll just be sending out announcements when we have our kind of deck ready. We'll also continue doing some virtual events, like I mentioned. And Alba, I think you might have time to stay a few more minutes. Like, let's just close the event so people can go, because it's at the top of the hour. But if people just want to say hi, we'll hang out for a little while, and you can just unmute yourself and come on camera if you want, just do like a little reception after the talk here on Zoom. So thank you so much again for being here with us. We really appreciate spending this time with you. And thank you so much to Alba and to the Peer Lab.